Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is Two-Way Tonight. I'm your tour guide, Mark Halperin, walking you through the day's political news. After which, we're going to have a latest installment of our D Future segment with a candidate for the Democratic National Committee chairmanship, or chairpersonship, I should say, and be able to ask questions of him and talk about the future of the party. It's a good day if you're a Democrat to try to get your arms around what's going well for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump had a pretty good day. Um, and there's some video that I'm going to show you that's a little bit contentious, but I think it speaks to still what is both lingering frustration in the Democratic Party, as well as a failure to come together to have a unified theory about what cost them the White House and what they might do differently. Widely reported that Donald Trump will be Time's Person of the Year. I worked at Time Magazine. I love Person of the Year, but it does not have quite the relevance for most people that it used to in the pre-internet age. However, there is one person on this planet who loves old media and loves old media accolades. So Donald Trump, I think, will be delighted. Still likes magazine covers. So that came as a CNN poll came, showing pretty big approval, given how divided the country is, for Donald Trump's performance in the transition. Majority approval for how he's doing overall in the transition. And then please, Noah, put up the graphic. Uh, a a a series of questions about the issues and how people rate Donald Trump on issues. Number four, please. Donald Trump is doing very well. He does not have the kind of support that some presidents have had when first elected, but obviously this is an unusual situation. Trump is an unusual newly elected president, and as you can see from this, and again, it might be a little hard to read depending on what kind of screen you're on. Donald Trump is doing very well. If you add up a lot of confidence in him and some confidence, as you can see, majority particularly doing well in the economy, but doing well on Russia, Ukraine, on immigration policy, on providing leadership for the country, on all these important issues, appointing the best people. Again, not an overwhelming majority, but doing pretty well. And if you want to be glass half full about this, doing better than many of his critics would have predicted after January 6th, for instance, when they said he could never get elected. Again, not only reelected or elected back into office, but right now having a bit of a honeymoon with a majority of the American people. Not overwhelming, but enough that, again, his folks can be pretty pleased about where things are. On the front of Capitol Hill, uh, where uh, 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 Patel continues to make courtesy calls with Hegseth and some of the other nominees, the FBI director resigned today. Not a shock. People expected that to happen, but significant because Donald Trump wanted it, right? He said, I want Wray to step down. Wray could have fought it in a number of ways. He chose not to. He chose to say, I'm going to step down. And even though he had 3 more years left on his term, it doesn't mean Donald Trump's going to get his way on everything. But it's another indication that the whole new sheriff thing is a reality and that Wray saw no other option. Donald Trump gets his way there. On Hegseth, Tom Cotton put out a letter that he sent to West Point today complaining about their cooperation with a negative story about Pete Hegseth. Why is that significant? Because Tom Cotton is a key senator, going to be the #3 Republican in the new Senate. And for Tom Cotton to be out there kind of helping the nominees through is significant. Some Republicans, of course, are not on the record in support of some of the nominees, including Pete Hegseth. Some Republican senators are, even before the hearing. Tom Cotton is out there basically saying, predicting everybody's going to be confirmed and urging Republicans implicitly in some cases and explicitly in others to be on the team, to be fighting for the nominees, to be part of that war, to go against the media, to go against critics. Pretty significant. If you want to be in the conversation here, particularly talk about the Democratic Party, raise your hand. Couple more things I want to show you before we bring in our guest. 2 pieces of video. The first is, or both are from a New York Times post-election, one of those post-election meetings with people from both campaigns and around the campaigns. And 2 pieces of video that I think are instructive about where we are. The first is Anita Dunn, longtime advisor to the Democratic Party. Democrats worked in the Biden White House, left after Biden stopped being the candidate, but is really one of the shrewdest people in the party, careful with her words, and a loyalist to Joe Biden. But listen to how she talked about the Hunter Biden pardon. Roll tape, please.
Not believe, and I don't think most people believe, that Hunter Biden should go to jail, and that, he had a serious addiction, that he broke the law, that he has pled guilty to that he has been held accountable, and has actually been publicly pilloried in a way that very few people who commit these crimes have ever been pilloried. So he has paid a certain price. He's also someone who has turned his life around, who has been sober now since 2019, who has a young child and is actually going to be a grandfather sometime next year. And had this pardon been done at the end of the term in the context of compassion, the way many pardons will be done, I am sure, and many commutations will be done, I think would have been a different story. So I will say, I absolutely agree with the president's decision here. I do not agree with the way it was done. I don't agree with the timing, and I don't agree, frankly, with the attack on our judicial system.
So some supportive words, kind of a supportive tone, but Anita Dunn there making it clear she doesn't like the way this pardon was done. She doesn't seem to agree with the timing. She doesn't seem to agree with the justification for it. And I think it's just super significant because it hints at where we are in the process. It hints at the reality that there is behind the scenes a lot of criticism. We saw some Democrats publicly criticizing the pardon, but not somebody like Anita Dunn, not someone who was a top staffer to both the vice president and the vice president, and someone who's been with him and loyal to him for a long time. And that reflects what I believe is more criticism that's coming, which will not be pleasant for the Biden family, but also a potential problem for the party as they try to sort out responsibility for what happened. This next piece of video is Sarah Longwell, longtime Republican strategist who became one of the leading voices of the anti-Trump movement, conducts a lot of focus groups, and who used her focus groups to try to figure out how to beat Trump, which of course she failed in. She was seated serendipitously, if you like conflict, next to Kellyanne Conway, the longtime Trump advisor and a veteran focus grouper herself. This is uncomfortable, but again, representative of some stuff that's going on. Roll tape, please.
First of all, thank you for pointing out that I do a lot of focus groups. I do, and they didn't say.
We all do. We just don't publicize them.
They didn't say Kamala Harris was going to win.
Trump.
Okay.
No,
you have stage 5 Trump derangement syndrome.
Yes, I get it. Sure.
No one is figuring.
Yeah, that's right. I think you guys are bad people who are bad. Yes, are bad for the country. Yes, that's right. Who attacked the Constitution.
Stop.
Donald Trump.
Stop.
Yeah, people.
Stop.
Yes,
No,
that's right.
this is what they do.
So here's the thing: the voters.
Just let Kellyanne let her.
No. I'm gonna.
So amongst the things Sarah Longwell said there to Kellyanne is, "You're bad people." Okay, so if you believe, as I have long said, that one of the problems the Democratic Party has is that they think the people who voted for Donald Trump or supported Donald Trump are bad people. That if you believe that that's not a way to expand their appeal, then that's not a great thing to say, even in the heat of that kind of panel. It's again representative of what I think continues to be a grappling by the Democratic Party at all levels and the anti-Trump Republican Party, the never-Trumpers, to accept what happened, to try to understand it, and to try to understand something you can hear on this platform almost every day, which is tens of millions of people voted for Donald Trump who don't really like Donald Trump and would have preferred another option. But what was on offer from the Democrats was less appealing to them. And you haven't seen, with some exceptions, including some of the Democrats who've come talk to us, you haven't seen a widespread recognition that if you call the voters who aren't for you, if you call them bad people or Nazis or evil, chances are you're not going to have much of a prospect of getting their vote. All right, let's move to our guest, who I believe is here. Somebody's going to tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe our guest is here. As I said, this is part of our series. All right, dude, go ahead and pin us both, please. This is part of our series to understand where the Democratic Party is, where it's headed. And we hope to speak to everybody who's running for the chair of the Democratic Party, as is our guest tonight. Noah, can you go ahead and pin him as well?
Here he is.
Hi there. How are you, Mark?
having
I'm
me.
fine. I'm very grateful for you being here. For some reason, I don't see you, which I'm going to solve. Or maybe somebody can help me solve it. Um, all right. James Skoufis, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You
Skoufis.
are. Well
All
done.
right. State Senator from New York, running for DNC chair. How's your campaign going so far?
It's been a whirlwind, but it's going exceptionally well. I think this is day 9 or 10 since I've announced. I have not been planning to do this for, never mind years, like some others who are running, not even months. I began contemplating this shortly after the election, and so I'm clearly not a household name. Outside of New York, I'm on an introductory blitz with the 448 voting members of the DNC. I've reached out to many of them, and certainly there are many to come. But the message for me is quite simple: that that at this moment in time, we need an aggressive outsider who knows how to win. And I come from a Trump plus 12 district. He's won my district 3 times over. I don't come into this contest with a long list of DNC relationships like some others. I certainly respect my competitors. But if we're going to bring the significant overhaul that I believe is needed to the DNC, someone who's been within the apparatus for years, if not decades, I think is unlikely to do that. Someone like myself, who again, aggressively outsider, knows how to win, and a fresh face, will throw out the old DC playbook and bring that change that I think is desperately needed.
What were you before you were a state senator?
I was in the lower house, the assembly, for 6 years.
All right. What were you before that? Have you been in government your whole career?
Yeah, so I was in project management for a bit, several years after college. I'm obviously not all that old. And so I was commuting down into the city and non-political. I was on my town board as well.
Did you grow up in the district you represent now?
I grew up in the district, yes. I'm originally from public housing in Flushing, Queens, but have lived most of my life in the district.
Have you ever worked in Washington?
I went to school at GW, and so I was an intern for former Congressman John Hall way back when. I don't think that counts as quote unquote working in Washington. And so I am very much the outsider, like I said, in this race.
Yeah. So let's say I'm a steel worker from Pennsylvania, and I say, Senator, I voted for Obama twice. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Joe Biden in 20, and I voted for Trump in 24. And I voted for Trump because of immigration and inflation. And I see no indication that your party has a clue what to do about those issues. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, so as DNC chair, I say to that person, I go to them with contrition and explain to them, we have not lived up to your expectations as a National Democratic Party, and we are going to do better. And instead of telling you that the economy is doing wonderfully and pushing white paper talking points from think tanks about, how our GDP is a little bit better than other countries, and so everything's wonderful, we need to do a lot more listening and a lot less lecturing, and we are going to do better. And no, if you care about border security, you're not racist. The next iteration of the Democratic Party is going to be responsive. And you look at those candidates who broke from what I'll call the stale Democratic script, these talking points that are handed down from the campaign committee arms, like Ruben Gallego. He engaged on this issue. He went and sought and received the Border Patrol Union's endorsement. And guess what? He won, and the top of the ticket lost in Arizona. And so I'd be going to folks like exactly the person you're describing, the firefighters union, the Teamsters, the college campus activists. It's both moderates and the left, where the big, once former large Democratic tent has frayed on both ends, and ask folks to give us another shot. We're going to do better. We're going to be listening more.
So one of the things the state party chair does, or national party chair does, is critique the incumbent president of the other party. Okay. CBS News just reported that Donald Trump has invited President Xi of China to attend the inauguration. What do you think of that? Speak as a prospective DNC chair. Good, bad, indifferent. What do you think of that?
I think it's remarkable that the man who wouldn't even show up and attend Joe Biden's inauguration is inviting dictators and quasi-dictators to his own inauguration. This is what we're going to see a lot of over the next 4 years. The American people, it's going to be crystal clear, the circus that will be this next administration. You have a wrestling executive running the education department, potentially. You've got an anti-vaxxer running the nation's health system. And so it's up to the next DNC chair and the National Democratic Party, yes, to underscore the circus and the harm that will be coming out of the administration. But it's also important that we're not just the anti-Trump party. We have to stand for something, and that something has to be working class values every single day at the core of our message.
Okay, this is a hypothetical, but we're here to sort of kick the tires on your abilities, right? Let's say you just gave that answer. You didn't know that Trump had done that, I assume, unless you're watching your phone like I am, right? So
I just came out of 2 interviews.
Yeah. So your gut response was, besides to criticize some other aspects of Trump, was to say he shouldn't invite a dictator to his inauguration, right? Right? That was one of the things he said.
Yes.
Okay. So what if I told you that Joe Biden invited Xi to his inauguration 4 years ago? What would you say? And that's a hypothetical, but what would you say then if you were confronted with that? What would you say?
I don't believe he did. And so I don't.
But you answered without knowing. You answered without knowing. You don't know that he did or not.
So here's what I'll say. That I even though no one put a fact in front of my face that Joe Biden did not invite this guy, President Xi, I know Joe Biden well enough as a citizen, as an elected official, to know that he would never invite someone like that.
Okay. What have you reaction been to your call? How many DNC members have you talked to? They're the electorate here. How many have you talked to roughly?
I'd say a little north of 100 so far.
And what's been their reaction?
The reaction has, I'd say there's a spectrum. 90% fall within this range of either intrigued, this is interesting, I want to hear more from this guy, he's got an attractive message, to, on the other end, a full subscriber to the message. Now, look, again, I'm introducing myself to the vast majority of these 448 DNC members. There have been quite a number of them who have told me, who have heard from all 4 candidates at this point, the election was today, you've got my vote. Now, there's a lot of time between now and February 1st. There's also a lot of folks who I have yet to speak with. I was out in Arizona for the Association of State Democratic Committees. I'm in Washington the next couple of days for the rules and e-board meetings. And so I am on an auto dialer, basically. The response has been exceptionally positive. But again, I don't walk into this with relationships as long as my arm, like some of the other contenders within the DNC who've been around for 5, 10, 15 years within the apparatus. But so far, I'd say the first week and a half, we've begun to build significant support that we're obviously going to look to continue to build.
All right, please, if you want to ask the senator a question, please raise your hand. I'm going to turn it over to you folks in just a moment. Senator, raising money is a big part of being DNC chairman. How will someone of your lack of relationships with the biggest donors in the party, how will you do that?
So let me say 2 things. First, if you ask around New York, it's subjective to say that I'm one of the strongest fundraisers in New York State politics, to the extent that in a Trump plus 12 district, the state Senate campaign arm does not have to spend a dime in my races. So I know how to have these conversations with donors. But what's equally, if not more important, is that I've spoken with DNC donors who have told me point blank they are not giving another red cent to the DNC unless there's a significant overhaul. And I spoke with a DNC member in Arizona several days ago who told me, obviously a battleground state, in the heat of the campaign, she was receiving upwards of 16 glossy mailers a day, daily, from the National Democrats. And I've run enough campaigns that I've all won to know there's nothing that 16th mailer is doing that the 15th mailer is not doing. But that underscores sort of the chokehold that the DC consultant class has on the DNC. And so I'm going to be well positioned. I would argue I'm uniquely positioned to tell that consultant class, no, we're not doing this anymore. To tell the folks who I'm referring to as the cocktail circuit in Washington, no, you're not ripping off our party anymore like hogs at a trough. We're going to be reorienting this money to the party loyalists in the trenches, the state committees, the county committees, local committees, our friends in organized labor, new partnerships. That's where we move the needle. The folks on the ground, human to human, we need to rebuild the trust with in a lot of these communities.
Senator, I thought you could stay with us longer than apparently you can. So I want to bring in folks now. I'll hold the rest of my questions for another time. Sue lives in Colorado. She was a big supporter of the Democratic Party, but she's drifted away a bit. So she's the perfect person to kick the tires on Senator Skoufis. Sue, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Unmute. I apologize. You need to unmute. There you go. Nope. One more time. One more time.
You could do it, Sue.
You got it. Go ahead. You're good.
Yes, I am a former Democrat. I left the Democratic Party because I felt like the Democratic Party had gaslighted me about Joe Biden's situation. I stopped giving money to the Democratic Party, to the Harris campaign. I think the DNC chair has to be a fighter, has to be authentic, has to recruit better candidates who are authentic. But also what the DNC, the whole Democratic Party has to do right now is to come clean on when, where everybody knew that Joe Biden was not capable of doing the job. He is basically just, abdicated right now. Trump is, for all intents and purposes, the president of the United States right now. When is the Democratic Party going to come out and be honest with the people that they want back in the party fold about what's going on in Washington? Every talking head on TV, oh, he's, as sharp as ever. No, he wasn't. That is my biggest issue right now with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, heard loudly and clearly. And the first thing that I would tell you as chair, Sue, is that I want you back in the party. And to the extent that you lost faith in our party, I'm committed, and the next iteration of the DNC, the National Party, ought to be committed to getting folks just like you back under our once big Democratic tent. I will tell you this. There are 4 or 5, I forget if, there's been 1 or 2 others who have entered the race now, candidates for DNC chair. This question, as you can imagine, has been incessantly asked of all of us by different media outlets. Do you think Joe Biden should have withdrawn from the race sooner? You're speaking with the only DNC candidate who is answering that question in a straightforward manner. And the answer is a one-word answer, and it's very simple. And the answer is yes. Any other answer is obfuscating, it's dodging, it's putting your head in the sand. And so I hear you loudly and clearly, and the Democratic Party should own that. We need to, as I said before, go to some folks like yourself with contrition and tell you and others, we need to do better. And on this issue, if you can't answer a question like this as a DNC chair candidate that is so top of mind for not just you, not just thousands, I'd say millions of Democrats and former Democrats, then I don't know how you're going to go on Fox News and into red communities and have conversations. I'm on Fox News Radio tomorrow. And that's because part of my campaign is very clearly that I am well situated to go into traditionally uncomfortable settings for most national Democrats and have conversations just like this with voters like yourself.
Sue, thank you. Matthew, we want to try to get as many folks as we can. Matthew, question for the senator.
Yeah, hi. Am I off mute? Yes.
You're good.
Hi, Senator. How are you? So I'm from New York State as well. I recognize your name. I've had quite a significant amount of dealings with the New York State legislature because I happen to be in a lawyer for the cannabis industry in New York State. I'm also a lifelong Democrat. I too have gotten, much like Sue, alienated from the Democratic Party. I have never until this election, I had never not voted for the top of the ticket for president. In this particular election, I wrote in Richie Torres and John Fetterman. The conjunction of those 2 candidates can probably explain to you why. What I think the problem with the Democratic Party is, and I think that, by the way, it's the same symptom in New York State that you've probably confronted in the legislature. It is the increasing influence of a strident and vociferous but unrepresentative left wing of the party. They call themselves progressive. I regard them as regressive. I would like to understand what you intend to do. And they've alienated a wide swath of voters. If you look at, I'm going to give you apart from the issue of Israel, which is obviously very important to me, I'm going to read something to you from my former law professor today, Elizabeth Warren. And this is about, by the way, the shooting of the CEO of United Healthcare.
I think I know what you're about to read, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, violence is never the answer, but you can only push people so far, and then they start to take matters into their own hands, appearing to condone what actually transpired. This is something that is alienated the entire part. So I would like to understand, if you're going to ask me what my question is, I would like to understand what you plan to do with regard to the increasing influence of an unrepresentative left wing.
Great question, Matthew. That's awesome. Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. I want to get in as many people as we can before the senators to go. Senator, please.
So what you just read back to me, I think is unacceptable. To answer your question, look, the DNC chair is not a policy-making position. I don't come into the DNC's role imposing my ideology on the rest of the party. My role, or at least a central role, is to rebuild the once big Democratic tent. We have not dominated in an election, in national election, in 16 years. You have to go back to 2008 since we had a large coalition that dominated in a national election. And so I'm not running for this position to kick anybody out of the party, kick anybody from out under the tent. But I'm also someone who is going to be able to come into this position and hopefully explain to people that we ought to be less interested, for example, in categorizing voters into different identity buckets and more interested in putting forward our working class values and honing in on those issues that, quite frankly, we didn't emphasize nearly enough. Everyone knows where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party stands on abortion. We did not need to send out 9,000 mailers and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on TV ads letting people know where the two parties stand on abortion. Conversely, I met a lot of voters who weren't quite clear on where we stood, if we stood anywhere as a national party, on other salient issues like affordability, like the border, like public safety. And so I've always leaned into that in my races. I know how to run those types of campaigns in difficult territory. And look, I think that we have to, as national Democrats, we've fallen into this trap of oftentimes speaking in overly academic terms, in trying to be overly politically correct. And a lot of voters perceive us as being more interested in running for, chancellor of a small liberal arts college than for public office. And so you're not going to see me doing that. We need to get back to a message and speaking on issues that are relatable to people, speaking in a manner that folks speak with their neighbors and their colleagues and their friends and their family. Right now, we're not doing that as national Democrats.
Matthew, thank you. Brett, go ahead, please.
Quick, easy question, I hope. Imagine you could take a time machine back to 2016. You have the choice of doing what the DNC did and pushing out Bernie Sanders when they had Hillary Clinton, and then to 2020 when they didn't hold a primary and blackball RFK Jr., who probably could have beat, 2024, who probably could have beat Donald Trump in the general election, but wasn't allowed to run. As DNC chair, what do you do to prevent things like that from happening and regain trust of members of your own party and not just people looking in and seeing what's happening?
Yeah, so I'm going to respectfully disagree on your point about RFK Jr. I do not think he would have even been competitive as a general election candidate. What I can say is that the DNC, the next DNC chair, should not be putting his or her thumb on the scale for any candidate when there's an open primary, as we expect in 2028.
James, your folks say you got to go. Brett, thank you for the question. I hope you'll come back. I hope you appreciated this forum. We'd love to come back. I got a million more questions for you.
This has been great.
But super impressed. I got to say, super impressed. I'd watch some video of you. I can't say I make you the absolute front runner, but really grateful to you for making time.
I'm working on that, though.
And for sharing. And tell your folks you want to come back because I'll listen to you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing it. Appreciate it. Thank you, Senator. All right. And Brett, thank you for the question, and thanks, Sue, and the others who asked questions. again, we thought he could stay with us longer, and it's unfortunate, but I thought it was great, and we hope to have the other people back. I'm going to run through some questions. I'm going to go through everybody who's got their hands up. If you want to get in the queue, please do. We're just going to do a little bit of Q&A, and we'll call it a night. Let's go to John. John, go ahead, please. John Darcy.
Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Man, I thought I was gonna get the DNC candidate,
Yeah, I
but
apologize.
just wanted
I apologize.
to. Oh yeah, I know. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about gerrymandering. So I know that the DOJ right now is like suing Texas because they had the trifecta drawing the legislative lines when they were redistricting in 2022 in that cycle. Do you anticipate maybe like the Trump administration or maybe local or state Democrats going after some of these really gerrymandered districts in like Illinois or Nevada or New Mexico? Because Illinois looks like a crazy person drew it, but it's super
it's
dynamic.
it's a tough issue because there's deference to the states, the state legislatures, and then you've got state courts, and you've got the federal courts, and it's a patchwork of reactions. And then you've had some justice departments getting into it. I think, to me, the best solution is the states because whenever you can have something done by the state, they should. If a district is drawn for political advantage that doesn't disadvantage a racial group or an ethnic group or some other group, but simply is partisan, then I think it's harder for the federal government to get involved, but not impossible, and they can choose to do it. It's an unfortunate reality that the technology that exists now for these folks allows them to redistrict, to their political advantage if they control the levers of power, in a much more sophisticated way to maximize their advantage. Some states have gone the route of trying to have nonpartisan redistricting, and that I think is probably the best, but very few states have done that. And so what will the Trump Justice Department attitude be towards redistricting? I suspect it'll be hyper-partisan like their predecessors, but I don't know. I think it's too soon to say. But if you don't like the looks of the Illinois map, I wouldn't look necessarily at the Trump Justice Department to fix it necessarily. John, thank you for the question. Thanks for being part of Two-Way. Grateful to you. All right, Pete. I begged Pete to ask a question earlier today, and lo and behold, I get my wish. Pete, welcome in. What's on your mind, sir?
Yes, Susie Wild's on my mind, and my question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being James Baker and 0 being like Reince Priebus, where do you think Susie's going to end up on the chief of staff wall? And do you think, what should we look for in early days to say, yes, she's headed towards one direction or the other?
Yeah, great questions. First of all, I have to, on behalf of Reince Priebus, say I can't let you just make him the 0. He's certainly not the worst chief of staff of all time. How's that for damning with faint praise? I'd say she's got the potential to be towards the greats. However, unlike James Baker, and I've said this before, I think on this platform, she's not going to be on TV a lot the way James Baker is. She's not going to be doing a lot on the national security front, I don't believe, the way James Baker did. I don't know how her role in dealing with Congress will compare to James Baker. She'll definitely do some of that, but I don't think she'll be the dominant figure the way Baker was at times in congressional relations. She's the model of the chief of staff to manage the building, manage the flow of information to the president's schedule, et cetera. And on those things, handling kind of logistics, scheduling, honest broker, and politics, I think she'll be excellent based on her previous records of accomplishment. But as I said, if you're not going to have the full Baker portfolio, which I don't imagine she'll have, I don't think you can say you're going to reach Baker's level, because he was doing all 4 roles, and I think she'll do maybe 1 or 2.5 at most. Thank you for the question, Pete. Glad to have you here always. Robert, come on in. What's on your mind, please?
I wanted to stand up for all the RFKers that were on the Trump campaign, because they were literally the tip of the spear. So, I mean, with all deference to the state senator, I'd have to say that they made the difference, at least on the ground in Pennsylvania. I would also say I'd reference Senator, what was it, Scott Brown, ex-senator from Massachusetts, who was up in New Hampshire when I was surveying that for the primary. And he was saying that RFK was pretty popular. We got pretty close in New Hampshire. So But that being said, there's a question that's been burning that I have. This whole thing about Republican, Democrat, et cetera, why do we even have parties to the extent that we have in the body politic now in the country? I just, I've seen, wholesale shifting of constituencies over years' time and decades' time. And it's like, a Reagan Republican like myself, I am that old, is not the Republican today. And I just don't understand why do we have these parties in the first place? I wish Dan were here. He could probably help us answer that.
Yeah, parties kind of grow out of the reality of the interplay between the private sector and the government, and other countries. The other parliamentary systems have them too. They're just a natural outgrowth. Our system's wacky because we only have two parties.
Right.
And there's lots in our system that reinforces the power of the two parties. They've become extraordinarily weakened, as you know, but they're still the only game in town. If you look at every elected official in the country at every level, the number of people who aren't Democrats or Republicans in partisan races is tiny. And so it's going to be with us. We're not going to get rid of them. And my hope is that they become revitalized and more responsive to the will of the people. I would like there to be more choice. But as long as we're going to have strong Democrat and Republican parties, I wish they were strong in ways that benefited the public rather than defied the public interest.
Absolutely. And I would have to say in that regard, I mean, everybody, I don't care what the political stripe is. I mean, I'm not, red or die or anything like that. I just want the best outcome for the country. I'm not, it doesn't matter to me if a great Democrat has a great idea and has a great whatever, let's go for it. I mean, I may lean historically Republican and everything, but I'm not at all beholden to, I've in Pennsylvania, I mean, I voted for Ed Rendell when he ran for governor. I voted for Josh Shapiro. I mean, when he ran for governor, I mean, even though I am a registered Republican, so it's just, I don't know. I find the whole party structure really distasteful and unhelpful.
Yeah, Robert, I hear you, and tens of millions agree with you. Thank you for the question. Raleigh, come on in and tell folks what's on your mind, please. Sorry, you got to unmute. My apologies. Go ahead. Oh, one more time, unmute.
It unmuted me. Okay. The question I wanted to ask was, so it's been like a little over a month since the election, and before the election, you said on Tucker Carlson, and then you said on here too, that you thought there would be some people in this country that would have a mental breakdown. I don't know if you remember saying that.
I do.
A month ago was a long time in your world, I know, and lately. But do you still feel that way, or do you think that they're handling it much better than you expected?
Well, it's hard to measure, right? Because I'm not like out there interviewing everybody. I would say the public manifestations of it are not as big as I thought. Like I thought there'd be more protests in the streets than there have been. But from talking to mental health professionals and dealing with the reality that Trump is not in office yet, and from the ratings on MSNBC and CNN, and from talking to people I know directly, I think there's a big problem. I hope I'm wrong. I hope my prediction was wrong, and I hope that the level it's at now does not grow. But I still am worried that it's going to grow. I still think a lot of people on the left are not really.
Do you think they're in denial still?
Yeah, I think there's some measure of denial. I do.
Okay.
But like I said, I hope I'm wrong. I don't make a lot of predictions, but I hope I'm wrong about that one. We'll see. But as I said, there's some encouraging signs. Raleigh, thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to have you part of this. All right, Joe, come on in. Question, please. Joe, unmute, camera on. We're going backwards. There's unmuted, camera on. Okay. There you go. Joe, thank you for joining. What's on your mind,
sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I was actually just thinking about this for the last couple of weeks. First of all, this is first time, long time, as you have requested. Great. For people to be.
Very, very grateful to you. Good, setting a good example for others.
Yeah, and I've just been noodling this idea about how the DNC could be more clever and how they run their campaigns. And my model was looking at Dan Osborne in Nebraska. And my thought is that if the DNC could create a program where you would fund a candidate that was independent on the independent ticket, but would, sign an agreement that they would follow like these 4 main pillars plank. But let's say that, the hot button issues such as like abortion or any number of other issues, you just kind of like pick your lane, and you fund them at like half the rate. So like, whereas you would fund a Democrat or an actual Democrat at a full rate, you would fund them at like a half amount. And I think the thing about it is the reason I think it's clever is because I've been listening to Ezra Klein, and I know that he's from the dreaded New York Times, but I really thought he's brought up a really good point when it comes to the outrage industrial complex. And I think that the best way to break that complex is to get more moderate voices in the party. And if you could get people that agree with you 51% of the way, you could moderate the whole party by pulling them a little bit to the right. And the other thing is that it makes a lot of non-competitive districts competitive.
John, when you say fund them at half, who are you saying funds them at half? The donors?
The DNC, the party writ large.
And what's the point of that?
The point of that is to support independent candidates up and down the ticket, especially in heavily Republican districts.
But is it to save them money?
No, what it is to encourage them to run. See, I think the problem right now is that if I have to follow the entire Democratic platform, I'm not going to be competitive in.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I think Osborne is an interesting case. He did better than expected. Of course, he didn't win, but it won't work. I don't think it'll work everywhere, right? It worked, or at least sort of worked in Nebraska because the Democratic Party is not that popular there. But if you're saying to try this in red states, I think I'd want to see it work once before I'd say it was a good idea. And Osborne was a great candidate, and he ran a great race. But it's also the case, and here's I think the other flaw in your idea. Although, just to be clear, I encourage all creativity. So I like your thinking creative. In that race, the Democrats chose not to run a candidate, right? They basically said, "Wink, wink, Osborne's our candidate." In most places, somebody's going to run as the Democrat because they're just not going to defer to an independent. And if you've got a left-leaning independent and a Democrat, it's going to be very hard to win. You're going to divide the vote on the left. So I'm not sure it's a good template.
No, I can say that that's definitely reasonable. So, for all of my Democratic leaning, it is actually interesting. Ezra Klein's a good listen for podcasts. I really appreciate the time, Mark. I hope you have.
Okay, Joe, thanks for calling in. Keep being creative. Come back regularly. Thank you for setting the example. First time participant. Dan, come on in. Question, comment. Thanks for being part of it. Unmute first.
Hey, Mark. So I'll try to be concise here. So number one, your gut feeling, do you think Tulsi Gabbard will get through to be named head of the DNI? And part of the same question is the DNI, I'm not really sure how important it is because, I mean, I listen and read a lot of stuff. Some people say it's basically just an administrative job. It's not really important. But then I've also heard that the head of the DNI is in charge of the president's daily briefing. And I feel like with Trump in particular, that might be important.
Yeah.
Somebody who can distill things for him. I think Tulsi Gabbard is a huge threat to the establishment, national security people. Do you think they'll be able to take her down?
Yeah. So Dan, thank you for the questions. I think if she stays on track, which is no new revelations, and she performs well in her hearing, and if Tom Cotton and Marco Rubio endorse her, as I think they will, I think she's on track to be confirmed. That job can be a very big job, But like a lot of jobs in the government, if you're kind of boxed out, there's other people who can take at least part of your portfolio away. But I think she'll be confirmed, and she's a pretty savvy operator, so I'd say she'd have a big role. Some of the people who oppose her because they are threatened by her, right? They don't want to see fundamental change. But there are people who oppose. There are people who oppose her on at least two other strands. One is they think that some of the statements she's made in the past, like about Assad and Syria, don't represent the right way to run foreign policy. They're suspects. Some even go so far as to say that means she's a dupe or an agent of a foreign power. The other thing is, just how effective will she be doing the job? She's served in the military, she's been in Congress, but not every there's the Peter principle. Some people get jobs they're not experienced enough to do, and they don't rise to the occasion. So I'm always on guard in the Trump era for people who are opposed because they do represent a threat to the deep state or the status quo, whatever you want to call it. But in this case, I think there are other questions. I know there are other questions that members have who aren't afraid of shaking up the status quo, and I think she'll have to address them. But as I said, if she does, I think she'll be confirmed. Dan, thank you for the questions. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. All right. Jacqueline, come on in. Tell us what's on your mind, please. After you unmute, of course.
So you were talking earlier about what if we had more parties, but would it really matter if these different parties normally in Europe break into coalitions and two sides anyways?
Well, they can be in a coalition, but they can still represent the interests of the Green Party or the pro-business party or a religious party. Like they don't have to be running the government to be as part of a coalition to have their voices heard. So I think that if people are inspired by a party, they're inspired by their platform, their personalities, their policies, then even if they're in a coalition, they can still feel part of the government. They can still feel the psychological being part of it. And also, ideally, the way the coalition is supposed to work, the policy preferences can be enacted, at least in part, by the coalition. So it's not a perfect thing, but in some ways, it does have advantages over our system, which again has two kind of blob parties that have to subsume everybody. And that makes them, less coherent ideologically than the parties you'll see in some of the Asian or European democracies.
How much do you think it matters that Kamala Harris was too far left versus she just didn't answer bread and butter concerns on the campaign trail enough?
I think they're both significant issues. There's no calipers sensitive enough to say which was a higher percentage of the problem. I have long said here and elsewhere that I think her biggest problem was she doesn't like to answer difficult questions under pressure. And so I'd lean more towards that. But I think if you look at the data and you look at the qualitative reaction to her, there's no doubt in my mind that failing to either own or effectively repudiate some of her previous left-wing positions also hurt her. But I tend to think it's the other one that's more. Jacqueline, thank you for coming. As always, appreciate your participation here. Krishna, please come in. Tell folks what's on your mind.
Hey, can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I tell you what, I have many views on many things.
Well, let's start with one view on one thing and see how it goes.
Okay. I think this, I don't like Hexet. I'm a Trump voter. I don't like Hexet.
What don't you like about him?
Well, when you are a Secretary of State, I think I heard Heather McDonald yesterday on some other show, and she was of the opinion that you could have a scandal, a personal scandal, and you could still do your job well in another area. For example, if you have a personal issue such as infidelity or something, it has no bearing on a job like defense, which I don't agree. There are very directly right. There are Chinese spies out there that are trying to get information from us, and don't ask me how I know it. And you could be vulnerable there. You can that personality trait actually exposes a vulnerability in the very personality. And yeah. I just don't understand how it does not spill over into your professional life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, your concern is shared by some Republican senators for sure. That, as you suggested, some of the allegations against him and some of the things he's acknowledged are okay if it's, Secretary of whatever. But for Secretary of Defense, for some, it's a bridge too far. And I think that will be a central consideration in his confirmation hearings. Central.
I do hope so. But then what I also don't like about that process somewhat, at least the way, don't get me wrong, I love the America First approach that Trump is taking. And that's very near and dear to me from a global conservative point of view. If you admit the existence of a global left, I also think that there is a global conservatism that I favor, and I can explain that if we have time and you allow me to. But that said, this whole opinion, this whole approach that, hey, Joni Ernst, if you are not going to confirm or going to play games with my nominee, guess what? I'm going to primary you out. True, he has some clout, but that's a poor way of doing it. There's a reason why the framers had this confirmation process the way they had it. I mean, it's incredible what they thought about in sustaining democracy.
Yeah. I hope if she doesn't vote, if she votes to confirm him, I hope she votes to confirm him because she thinks he's the right person for the job, not because she feels threatened. That would be my hope. And Joni Ernst is the kind of person who might do that. And as I've said before, all of the Republican senators who are considering not voting for some of the Trump nominees, it's not vendetta. It's not they're puppets of the Democrats. It's not that they're getting bribed to do it. They really believe that their responsibility is to make sure they're the right people. So I think they should be supported in their deliberations, and whatever they decide, they should do it based on the merits and not for bad reasons, including the threats. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. Grateful to you for participating. Richard, come on in. Tell us what's on your mind, please. After you unmute, which is my responsibility to help you with. There you go.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good. How are you, sir? Thanks for coming on.
Good. This morning on the morning meeting, there was some discussion about the Biden legacy and how he's trying to lay that out.
Yeah.
And with the U.S. foreign policy being regime change in Syria over the since 2011.
Yeah, I mean, not formally, we weren't espousing the overthrow, but it certainly the body language was we would welcome it.
I'm surprised that he's not doing cartwheels on Capitol Hill, touting that as a victory. And so my question is, in your style, with one being a bad situation where there's contention between Turkey and Iran, the United States, Russia, and Israel in Syria, along all of its proxies, and 10 being a perfect situation where Qatar builds a pipeline and Russia abandons its naval base and everything is peaceful and there's no refugees. Where do you think that ends up?
Richard, I don't have the foggiest idea, and I don't think anybody does. I mean, I think I've been pleasantly surprised so far that based on reports out of the country, that things are holding together, right? There's some civic order. There's police directing traffic. There's construction projects, working. Restaurants are open. So I think, and this has been one of my questions that I've asked experts I've talked to, which is how much is there a middle class, a business class of people who can keep the civic order in the country operating and would welcome some sort of representative government? And that seems to be possible based on what's happened so far. I really always worry about Turkey because whenever, as we've said here before, whenever there's conflict with the Turks and the Kurds, it's always a recipe for a lot of tension. I'll be curious to see what the Israelis do, what the Saudis do, what Qatar does. There's lots of stakeholders there, and it's really up to the people of Syria, right, for the most part, to say, well, they've got a big say in it, and not necessarily through their governmental actions, but how much does the society hold together? How much is there a degree of stability that will allow people who are interested in politics to work their way, hopefully, towards something that's a lot more civil and representative of the people than the longtime Assad regime.
It's
so
an interesting
far, hardened. Go ahead.
it's an interesting case because they've been going through essentially a civil war for 13 years.
Yeah.
And then the dictator falls versus, so it was slowly and all of a sudden, versus quickly and all of a sudden that we've seen in the Middle East.
Yeah. Look, a weakened Russia and a weakened Iran gives us a possibility for a better outcome. Turkey's a big problem, but they've got the possibility of a good outcome. And I think freed from Assad, hopefully galvanizes people who don't want to waste the moment. But your two scenarios are both plausible, and obviously it's likely to be somewhere in between. But I like where it is so far, and I think you're going to see some European countries also play a role, and maybe even the UN. And as long as there's not widened civil war, and again, there seems to be less conflict since he left rather than more, that's a good thing. Every day there's not an effort to govern the country through winning war is a good day where they may head towards a better solution. Richard, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Say one more thing.
I was just curious, the lack of grandstanding of the Biden administration trying to get at least one more victory out, or not trying to tag themselves to it.
I think there's a number of reasons why they wouldn't do it. Number one, they didn't really cause it to happen. They'd be the scarecrow, the
mostly Israel.
Yeah, mostly, and also mostly, I think that the internal conflict. So they'd be taking credit where it's not due. Number two, things could go bad, right? I mean, the rebels are not the friends of the United States, so cheering the outcome is a problem. And then I think Joe Biden's not in a position to take much powerful credit for anything right now because he just doesn't seem to have the rhetorical chops to do it. So I'm not surprised they're not taking more credit. I think they're being pretty cautious to mirror the reality that, as your initial question suggested, we just don't know what's happening and what's going to happen. Richard, thank you for coming on. Come back regularly. Really appreciate it. All right, Brian, play us off the air. Give us a farm update and say good evening and good night.
Yep. The farms. We got hula hoop girls coming up to the farm now. Because that's going to be a good way to relearn balance, like to make some new neural pathways, doing something we've never done before. And then
we're gonna expect video of that, Brian.
Yep. When it gets dark, they light them on fire too, so it's going to be very
probably not safe. But I look forward to that video.
They said it's safe. They said they do it. I knew a girl in college that did it, so I've seen it happen before. But
any other updates besides hula hoop girl?
Yes, is a buddy of mine reached out just this evening who's works for you would know the company, but they're associated with the Pew Charitable Trust, and they're going to get involved, and also so is my college up in Amherst is going to get involved.
Amazing. Those are two good additions. All right, Brian, we're going to end the show with my favorite joke. I say good night, Brian, and you say good night, Brian. Ready?
Okay.
Here we go. Say good night, Brian.
Good night, Brian.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll be back 9 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow with Sean and Dan for another episode of The Morning Meeting. This program will be here tomorrow night. And we got some stuff coming up, but I'm not ready to announce it yet. So stay with us. Spread the word. Be part of Two-Way and bring 5 guests and win hats and buttons and mouse pads and USB sticks, all the great swag. Brian, have a great night. Have a great night, everybody.
Mark.
We'll see you soon.
Yep.